In the middle of a cold rain, the dog Bolt suddenly pulled his owner, the veteran Cole, into a dark alley. There, a woman and her small child were desperate. Cole only thought he was saving them, but he never imagined that his kindness was a one-way ticket into a deadly conspiracy, where justice had been blinded by cruel lies. What will their journey to find the truth be like? Please support us by subscribing to the channel. Where are you listening to this story from? The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, plastering wet leaves to the slick asphalt of the small Oregon coastal town. For Cole, it was just another Tuesday night, another walk to mark the end of another quiet day. At 40, the former Army veteran carried a quiet resilience in his tall, lean frame. His short brown hair was beginning to show distinguished flecks of silver at the temples, a stark contrast to a face that remained open and kind. Beside him, trotting with a steady, confident gait, was Bolt, a magnificent 5-year-old German shepherd. Bolt's thick coat, a handsome blend of gray and white, repelled the worst of the downpour. But his focus was absolute, his loyalty to the man holding the leash unwavering. Their routine was shattered by a sudden, sharp tug. Cole stopped, his worn boots silent on the wet pavement. Bolt stood, rigid, his powerful body tensed and his head cocked, ears swiveling to pinpoint a sound lost to Cole beneath the drumming of the rain. It wasn't the aggressive growl of a perceived threat, but a low, concerned whine deep in his throat. Bolt pulled again, this time with an undeniable urgency, leading Cole away from the familiar street and toward the gaping mouth of a dark, narrow alley. Cole's hand tightened on the leash, his instincts humming with a familiar caution. He trusted his dog's judgment more than his own. He followed Bolt into the shadows, the smell of damp brick and refuse heavy in the air. At the far end, huddled against a graffiti-scarred wall to escape the worst of the wind, were two figures. As they drew closer, the scene resolved into a heartbreaking image. A young woman, who couldn't have been older than her late 20s, was wrapped in a thin, soaked jacket, her face pale and etched with a fear so profound it seemed to have hollowed out her eyes. She was desperately clutching a small bundle to her chest, trying to shield it with her own body. A faint, whimpering cry reached them, the sound of a baby in distress. Bolt, sensing the raw despair, released the tension in his posture. He moved forward slowly, cautiously. The woman, Ilara, flinched as the large dog approached, pulling her son, Jamie, tighter against her. But Bolt stopped a few feet away, lowered his head, and let out another soft whine. He crept forward until his wet nose could gently nudge the baby's blanket-wrapped leg. It wasn't an act of aggression, but one of profound instinctual comfort. For the first time that night, a flicker of something other than terror crossed Ilara's face. It was the beginning of trust, offered by a silent, four-legged guardian in the dark. Cole stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. "Ma'am," he said softly, "are you all right? Your son. He feels warm. I think he has a fever." Cole's house was small and smelled faintly of wood smoke and clean laundry, a stark contrast to the cold, damp alley. He held the door open, but Ilara hesitated on the threshold, clutching Jamie as if the modest warmth of the doorway was a barrier she was terrified to cross. It was Bolt who broke the spell. The dog padded inside, shook the rain from his gray and white coat, and then turned to look at her, his intelligent eyes expectant. With a shuddering breath, she stepped inside. Immediately, Bolt's demeanor shifted. He was no longer just a concerned bystander. He was the guardian of this territory. He positioned himself by the hallway, observing Ilara's every move with a quiet, watchful intensity. He wasn't threatening, but the message was clear. This was his home, and she was an unknown element within it. Ignoring the dog's silent scrutiny, Cole's focus was entirely on the baby. He led Ilara to a comfortable armchair, then returned with a basin of warm water and a soft towel. As Ilara gently sponged Jamie's feverish skin, her movements were filled with a desperate, tender love. Bolt watched from his post, and in that moment, something in him settled. He saw not an intruder, but a mother. He saw her gentle hands, heard the soft, broken lullaby she whispered. The rigid line of his back softened, and with a quiet sigh, he lay down, though his eyes never left the pair. He was no longer guarding against her, but watching over them. Later, after Jamie was asleep in a makeshift bed on the sofa, Cole handed Alara a steaming mug of broth. The silence was thick with unspoken questions until he broke it gently. "You don't have to talk," he said, his voice low. "But you're safe here." That simple assurance was all it took. Her story came out in a torrent of grief and disbelief. She spoke of her husband, Mark, a good man who had died in a sudden construction accident a few states over. And then she spoke of Mark's brother, Victor. With a chilling emptiness in her voice, she described how Victor, a man she never trusted, had twisted the family's grief into suspicion. He accused her of being involved, of wanting Mark's assets, poisoning everyone against her until they threw her out with nothing. Exhausted and emotionally drained, she finally fell silent. She stood up to check on her son, her feet unsteady. As she peered into the dimly lit living room, her breath caught in her throat. There, on the rug beside the sofa, lay Bolt. His massive form was a wall of silent protection, his head on his paws, his steady gaze fixed on the sleeping child. The sight of the powerful animal standing vigil over her son was more reassuring than any words could ever be. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, a single, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in Alara's broken heart. A week passed, and the rhythms of Cole's quiet life shifted to accommodate his new house guests. The frantic edge of their arrival had softened into a fragile, tentative peace. Jamie's fever had broken, his weak cries replaced by the happy, gurgling sounds of a healthy baby. Alara remained reserved, a shadow of deep sadness still clinging to her. But she moved with a quiet purpose, helping with small chores, her presence turning the house into something closer to a home. The constant, watchful presence of Bolt seemed to have a calming effect on her. She knew the loyal dog was never far from her son's side. The three of them, and their four-legged guardian, had fallen into a gentle, unspoken routine, a small island of calm in the storm of their lives. One afternoon, sunlight streamed through the living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Alara was folding a small pile of laundry Cole had done for her, while Jamie lay on a thick blanket on the floor, surrounded by a few toys Cole had found in a charity shop. Among them was Jamie's one possession from his old life, a worn, stuffed fox with faded orange fur and one button eye. Bolt lay nearby, seemingly dozing with his head on his paws. Jamie, with a happy squeal, pushed the fox away. It rolled to a stop near Bolt's nose, but instead of ignoring it, the dog's head lifted, his ears twitching. He got up and began to sniff the stuffed animal with an intensity that was anything but playful. He ignored the tail and ears, focusing entirely on a single spot on the fox's soft belly. He nudged it with his nose, then let out a low, questioning whine and looked directly at Cole. "What is it, boy?" Cole asked softly, watching the strange behavior. Bolt nudged the fox again, more insistently this time, then gently but firmly pawed at the spot. His persistence was peculiar, and it set Cole's well-honed instincts on edge. The dog wasn't playing, he was communicating, he was trying to show them something. Trusting the dog's senses, Cole knelt down and picked up the toy. He squeezed the area Bolt had indicated and felt a hard, flat object beneath the soft stuffing. He ran his fingers over the seam and found what Bolt had been trying to show him. A short length of thick, clumsy stitching that didn't match the delicate factory seam on the rest of the fox. With Alara watching, her hands frozen mid-fold, Cole retrieved a small pocket knife. He carefully sliced the thick threads. Reaching into the cotton stuffing, his fingers closed around something solid. He pulled it out. It was a small, heavy, old-fashioned key, and nestled beside it, a miniature metal safe box, its dark gray surface cool to the touch. The afternoon's peaceful silence was suddenly charged with the weight of a secret that had been deliberately and desperately hidden away. The small key slid into the lock of the miniature safe with a soft click. Cole and Alara leaned forward, their breaths held. Inside, there was no money or jewelry, only a few sheets of paper, folded tightly and yellowed with age. Cole gently unfolded them. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in great haste or distress. It was a simple, unsigned will from Mark. Alara's eyes filled with tears as Cole read the first line, which left all of his personal savings and possessions to her and Jamie. But it was the last sentence, scrawled at the bottom of the final page, that made the air in the room grow cold. "Do not trust my brother Victor," it read. "His greed is a sickness, and he will stop at nothing to get what he wants." The words hung in the air, a chilling validation of Alara's story. Their discovery was interrupted by a sharp, official rap on the front door. Bolt was on his feet instantly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Cole placed a calming hand on his back before opening the door to two police officers. The older one, a man with tired eyes and a thick mustache, offered a polite but strained smile. "They were just doing a routine check," he explained, following up on a call concerning Alara's welfare. The questions were vague, but the undertone of suspicion was clear. The visit left a bitter taste in Cole's mouth. Over the next day, he noticed the change in the neighborhood. Whispers that stopped when he walked by, curtains that twitched in windows. The poison Victor had spread was beginning to take root. The true threat arrived the following afternoon, in a sleek black sedan that looked glaringly out of place on their quiet, gravelly street. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. It was Victor. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He walked up the path carrying a bouquet of flowers, the very picture of a concerned brother-in-law. But before his hand could even touch the door, Bolt was there, blocking the entrance. The dog's transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. A deep, menacing growl ripped from his chest. His upper lip curled back to reveal a formidable set of teeth, and the fur along his spine bristled. He planted his feet, a living wall of gray and white fury between this man and the family inside. Cole grabbed Bolt's collar, his own body tense. "Bolt, easy," he commanded, but his eyes were locked on Victor. He saw the man's charming mask falter, a flicker of annoyance and genuine fear flashing in his eyes as he looked at the dog. And in that moment, everything snapped into place for Cole. Mark's desperate warning, the police, the rumors, and now, Bolt's pure, incorruptible instinct. This was not a dog being territorial. This was a guardian, identifying a threat with absolute certainty. Cole looked from his loyal dog to the man on his porch and knew, without a single doubt, that the enemy had just shown his face. The air in the house remained thick with tension long after Victor's sedan had disappeared down the street. Cole tried to reassure Alara, but his words felt hollow even to him. The brief sanctuary he had offered them now felt like a cage, with unseen predators circling just outside. They didn't have to wait long. An hour later, two police cars pulled up, their arrival swift and silent. This time, there was no pretense of a routine check. The heavy knock on the door was an order, not a request. Cole opened it to find the same older officer, his face now a grim, unreadable mask, flanked by three other uniforms. He held up a folded document. "Alara Evans," he stated in a flat official voice. "You are under arrest on suspicion of involvement in the disappearance and possible harm of Mark Brooks." Alara let out a strangled cry. "No, that's not true," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I didn't do anything." The officer ignored her, continuing to list the evidence with cold precision. Her fingerprints found on a steel hammer inside the victim's house, a blood-stained shirt discovered in a trunk she had brought with her, and an anonymous 911 call from a woman whose voice was a perfect match to hers, admitting she wanted Mark gone. The trap was intricate, cruel, and it snapped shut around her with brutal efficiency. As one officer moved forward with handcuffs, a quiet woman with kind but firm eyes stepped inside. She was a social worker, here to take custody of Jamie. That was when the fragile calm of the house shattered completely. Ilara screamed, a raw, primal sound of a mother being torn from her child. She fought against the officers, her eyes locked on Jamie, who, sensing his mother's terror, began to wail. Cole had to physically restrain Bolt, whose protective instincts had exploded into a furious symphony of barks and snarls as he tried to get to the officers. The social worker gently but firmly lifted the crying baby from the makeshift bed. "Please," Ilara sobbed as they led her out the door, her wrists bound behind her. "Please, take care of my baby." The door clicked shut, leaving behind a deafening silence. The police cars drove away, taking with them the only life the house had known for the past week. Then, a new sound filled the void. Bolt threw his head back and let out a long, mournful howl, a sound of pure, heart-wrenching anguish. He raced through the house, his claws scrabbling on the wooden floors, sniffing frantically at the empty sofa, whining at the front door, searching for the pack that had been stolen from him. Cole stood frozen in the center of the room, a storm of helpless rage and sorrow churning inside him. He looked down at his loyal companion, whose intelligent eyes were now filled with confusion and a pain that mirrored his own. Kneeling, he wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck. "We'll get them back, boy," he whispered into Bolt's fur, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, we will get them back." Cole's first visit to the county jail was a stark and sterile affair. A thick pane of glass separated him from Ilara, who sat on the other side in an orange jumpsuit that seemed to drain all color from her already pale face. Her eyes were swollen and red-rimmed, reflecting a deep well of despair. She barely spoke, her responses mere whispers, the fight seemingly gone from her. Cole focused on being a steady presence, his voice calm and reassuring, as he reiterated his belief in her innocence and his promise to bring her and Jamie home. Leaving her there felt like another betrayal, but he knew he had to act. Back at the small house, the silence was heavy, broken only by Bolt's occasional restless sighs. The dog seemed to understand the shift in their world, his usual playful energy replaced by a quiet vigilance. Cole pulled out the digital copy of the neighbor's security footage. He watched it again and again, his gaze fixed on the shadowy figure, leaving Ilara's house on the night Mark disappeared. The person was tall, their features obscured by a hood, but there was a distinct way they moved, a slight hesitation in their stride. And then he saw it. Just as the figure reached the edge of the frame, something dark fell from their gloved hand. It was small and easily missed, but Cole's heart leapt. He contacted Mrs. Ruth, the elderly neighbor who had provided the footage, explaining that he needed to check if she had found anything else that night. Mrs. Ruth, a woman with sharp eyes and a lifetime of observing her surroundings, remembered seeing a dark object near Ilara's porch the morning after Mark vanished. She had picked it up, thinking it was a piece of litter. She retrieved it from a drawer in her cluttered living room. A thick, leather work glove, the kind a man might wear for heavy labor. Cole took the glove back to his house, his hands carefully holding it as if it were the most precious artifact. He laid it on the floor in front of Bolt. "Find him, boy," he murmured, pointing towards the glove. Bolt, his senses immediately engaged, lowered his head and inhaled deeply. His powerful nose worked, picking apart the scent threads clinging to the leather. For a moment, he was still, processing. Then, a low growl rumbled in his chest, his gaze fixed on the glove. He looked up at Cole, his eyes bright with focus, and then he began to pace, agitated, towards the front door. He whined and scratched at the wood, his message clear. The scent was familiar, and it was leading somewhere outside. Cole clipped Bolt's leash on, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that Bolt had just picked up the trail of their enemy. The moment they stepped outside, Bolt was no longer a pet but a hunter on a mission. With the scent of the leather glove locked in his senses, he pulled Cole forward with a purpose that was both powerful and precise. His nose stayed low to the ground, sweeping back and forth as he followed the invisible trail through the sleeping town. They left the quiet residential streets behind, their path taking them across old railway tracks and into a part of town that seemed forgotten by time. The air grew heavy, with the smell of rust and neglect. Cole let the leash go slack, trusting his companion completely, as they navigated the cracked pavement and overgrown weeds of the industrial district. They came to a long, bleak row of identical storage warehouses, their corrugated metal walls stained with age. Bolt didn't hesitate. He veered sharply, pulling Cole directly towards a specific unit near the end of the row. He stopped dead in front of the roll-up door marked with a faded number 7 and began to bark. It wasn't his usual warning bark. This was a sharp, insistent, accusatory sound directed solely at the silent metal door. He clawed at the concrete, his body trembling with agitation. A profound sense of certainty settled over Cole. This was it. The trail had ended here. Cole found a small, dimly lit office at the front of the complex, where a grizzled manager named Mr. Henderson sat reading a newspaper. The man was initially skeptical, shrugging his shoulders and claiming he couldn't give out access to security footage without a police warrant. But Cole was persistent. He presented his veteran ID and spoke with a calm, desperate urgency about a life-threatening situation, about a young mother who had been wrongly accused and a child who had been taken away. He conveyed the gravity of the situation, the sense that time was running out. Seeing the sincerity and steel in Cole's eyes, the old manager finally relented, leading him to a dusty monitor in the back room. Cole's fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting the date of the fake 911 call. He fast-forwarded through the grainy footage, his heart pounding in his chest. And then he found it. The timestamp on the screen was a perfect match. A sleek black sedan, identical to Victor's, pulled into view. The driver's side door opened, and Victor himself stepped out. He looked around furtively, his polished confidence replaced by a nervous energy, before disappearing into Unit 7. The camera had captured it all. It was the irrefutable proof he needed, the visual link between Victor and the conspiracy. With trembling hands, Cole saved the footage. Bolt hadn't just followed a scent, he had led them straight to the heart of the lie. Clutching the USB drive that held Victor's damning image, Cole drove not home, but to a small, cluttered electronics shop on the other side of town. The shop was run by Leo, an old army buddy whose battlefield had shifted from deserts abroad to the digital landscapes of cybersecurity. Leo, a man with perpetually tired eyes and fingers stained with solder, listened intently as Cole laid out the situation. Without a word, he took the audio file of the anonymous 911 call. The shop was filled with the low hum of computer fans as Leo worked, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. Waveforms danced across a screen, frequencies were isolated, and pitch patterns were analyzed. After a few minutes of intense silence, Leo swiveled in his chair. "It's a fake, Cole," he said with absolute certainty. "Machine-generated audio. The vocal artifacts are unmistakable. This isn't a recording of a person. It's a recording of a computer pretending to be one." With the final piece of the puzzle in his possession, Cole returned home. He spread everything out on his small kitchen table, creating a makeshift war room. There was the grainy printout from Mrs. Ruth's camera, showing the hooded figure dropping the glove. There was the handwritten will from Mark, a desperate warning from beyond the grave. There was the USB drive with the warehouse footage, placing Victor at the scene of the digital crime. And now, there was Leo's signed report, confirming the 911 call was a fabrication. Looking at it all laid out, Cole finally understood the full, chilling scope of Victor's plan. He hadn't just framed an innocent woman. He had manipulated his own grieving mother, weaponizing her sorrow to cast Alara out and clear his path to Mark's assets. The calculated cruelty of it all settled like ice in Cole's stomach. He knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. The next morning, he walked into the office of Sarah Vance, a local attorney known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense demeanor. She was a woman in her late 40s, with intelligent, focused eyes that missed nothing. She listened patiently as Cole, with Bolt lying quietly at his feet, recounted the entire story, from the rainy night in the alley to the AI-generated phone call. He presented his folder of evidence, laying each piece on her polished desk. Her professional composure slowly transformed into an expression of intense focus. She looked at the evidence, then at Cole, a newfound respect in her gaze. "Mr. Evans," she said, her voice firm and clear, "they built a house of cards, and you've just handed me the evidence we need to blow it all down." She tapped the folder. "We won't just be defending Alara. We're going on the attack. We will use this to show the court and the world who the real monster in this story is." The courtroom buzzed with a tense anticipation. Alara sat at the defense table, her face pale but with a newfound glimmer of hope in her eyes, watching Sarah Vance with a quiet trust. On the prosecution side, the district attorney, a stern-faced man named Mr. Davies, presented his case, meticulously laying out the circumstantial evidence against Alara. The blood-stained shirt, the hammer with her fingerprints, the chilling transcript of the 911 call. Each piece was presented to paint a picture of guilt. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, and Alara's fragile hope seemed to flicker. Then it was Sarah's turn. Her voice, calm and steady, filled the courtroom as she began to dismantle the prosecution's narrative, piece by painstaking piece. She introduced the neighbor, Mrs. Ruth, who testified about the hooded figure and the discovery of the work glove. She presented Mark's unsigned will, its desperate warning echoing in the silent room. And then came the digital evidence. Leo took the stand, his testimony clear and irrefutable as he explained the technical impossibilities of the 911 call being genuine. The shift in the jury's faces was palpable. Doubt had been sown. The most powerful testimony, however, came from an unexpected witness. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, Mark and Victor's mother, a woman whose face was etched with years of quiet sorrow, walked slowly to the stand. Cole had spent hours with her, gently showing her the evidence, the cold calculation behind her younger son's actions. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her words filled with grief and a dawning horror. She recounted Victor's long history of manipulation, his insatiable greed, and how he had preyed on her grief to turn her against Alara. Her tearful confession hung in the air, a devastating indictment against her own son. As Mrs. Brooks finished speaking, a wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Victor, who had been sitting with a look of smug confidence, suddenly paled. He knew the tide had turned. In a desperate, reckless move, he bolted from his chair and made a dash for the back exit. Pandemonium erupted, but before he could reach the door, a blur of gray and white launched from the gallery. Bolt, who had been sitting quietly beside Cole, his senses on high alert, had reacted instantly. With a powerful leap, he intercepted Victor, his teeth bared in a fierce snarl. Victor stumbled and fell, Bolt's weight pinning him to the ground, his powerful jaws just inches from his face. The courtroom deputies, initially caught off guard, rushed forward and cuffed the struggling Victor. The chaos slowly subsided, leaving behind a stunned silence. Justice, it seemed, had not only been revealed, but swiftly enforced, thanks to the unwavering loyalty and decisive action of a remarkable dog. In the aftermath of Victor's chaotic arrest, the judge dismissed all charges against Alara. The words, "You are free to go," felt like a dream. But the dream became real an hour later, in the quiet, sterile office of the Social Services Building. The moment Alara saw Jamie, she fell to her knees, her arms outstretched. The toddler, his face lighting up with recognition, stumbled into her embrace. The tears she shed were not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, cleansing relief. Bolt, who had waited patiently beside Cole, whined with joy, nudging his wet nose against both mother and son, his pack finally whole once more. A few days later, a hesitant knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Brooks. With eyes full of shame and regret, she apologized to Alara, not with excuses, but with a simple, painful honesty. Looking at the woman who had also lost a son to Victor's web of lies, Alara found not anger, but a shared grief. The first steps toward healing had begun. A year later, the storms had passed, leaving behind the clear, fresh air of a new beginning. On a bright afternoon, Cole and Alara were married. There was no large crowd, just a few close friends, Mrs. Brooks and a happy, babbling Jamie. Bolt served as the proud four-legged best man, lying at Cole's feet during the simple ceremony, his tail thumping a steady rhythm on the wooden floor. It was a celebration not of a dramatic romance, but of a quiet, unshakable love forged in crisis and built on a foundation of profound trust. The story finds its true end on a different day, under the golden glow of an Oregon sunset. Cole and Alara walk hand in hand along the shoreline, the waves washing over their bare feet. Jamie, now a confident toddler, shrieks with delight as he chases the retreating foam, his laughter carried on the salty breeze. And weaving between them all, a joyful blur of gray and white fur, is Bolt. He sprints across the wet sand, chasing seagulls, his body a perfect picture of freedom and happiness. But he never strays too far. Every few moments, he gallops back to them, leaning against Cole's legs for a reassuring pat or nudging Alara's hand with his head, his intelligent eyes glowing with contentment. He was the one who had heard a cry in the rain. He was the one who had sniffed out a hidden secret. He was the one who had faced down a villain without hesitation. He was more than a dog. He was their guardian, their hero, and the unwavering cornerstone upon which their new family had been built. Sometimes, the deepest loyalty doesn't speak with words, but with unwavering action. It's a silent promise that even when the world turns its back, you are not alone. Bolt's journey reminds us that heroes come in all forms, often with four paws and a wet nose. We would be so honored to hear about the loyal companions who have brought light into your life, so please share your own stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, liking the video and sharing it with others helps spread this message of hope. By subscribing to Voice of Paws, you help us continue to find and tell these tales. Another journey is waiting for you now on the screen, and we hope to see you there.